In the village of Nkosi, there was a woman named Amina. She was as poor as the dusty ground beneath her feet. Her clothes were like old rags full of holes and tears, barely covering her body. Her heart, it was more of a shell than a home. The roof leaked whenever the sky cried, and the cold wind blew through the torn windows as if mocking her. Amina had no bed, she slept on the hard, bare floor, curling up like a hungry cat to keep warm. Every night, she prayed for a better life, but the mornings always greeted her with the same struggle. She tried everything to survive, fetched water for people, washed their clothes, and even worked on their farms, but no matter how hard she worked, her hands always came back empty. It was as if the world had turned its back on her. Her fellow villagers, the women she grew up with, were all married, living comfortably with their families. They wore fine clothes, their children laughing and playing around them. But Amina, she had no husband, no child, no one to call her own. The villagers whispered behind her back. "She's cursed," they said, "born with bad luck." Even the men kept their distance, fearing her misfortune would rub off on them. Amina's life was a tale of sorrow. She walked through the village like a shadow, unnoticed, unloved, and unwanted. Yet, despite everything, she carried on, hoping that one day the sun would shine brighter on her life. But that day had not come, not yet. One hot afternoon, Amina carried her bundle of tattered clothes to the river. The sun beat down fiercely, and the river sparkled like a pot of melted silver. She knelt by the water, scrubbing her rags with hands as rough as the village roads. The sound of the rushing water was the only comfort she had. As Amina washed, she heard the soft rustle of footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, her heart skipping like a frightened bird. There, standing tall and proud, was a woman dressed in clothes so fine they seemed to belong to a queen. Her skin glowed, her jewelry sparkled, and her smile was as sharp as a knife. "Good day," the woman said, her voice smooth like honey. "Good day, ma'am," Amina replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman stepped closer. "My name is Asha. I've been watching you, Amina. I know your struggles." Amina's eyes widened. How did this stranger know her name? Asha smiled as if reading her thoughts. "I have a business for you. It's simple and will change your life." Amina stared, her mind spinning. What kind of business? Asha reached into her bag and pulled out a bundle of crisp notes. "You will collect used panties from the villagers. Bring as many as you can. For every load, I will pay you handsomely." Amina's jaw dropped. "Panties?" she asked, confusion thick in her voice. "Yes," Asha said firmly. "Don't ask questions. Just do as I say, and you'll never be poor again." With that, she handed Amina the money and turned to leave. "Remember," she said, "I'll be waiting." Amina sat by the river, clutching the money, her mind clouded with questions. What kind of business was this? Why panties? She didn't understand, but the weight of the money in her hand was real, and for the first time in her life, hope stirred in her chest. She packed her clothes and headed home, her heart beating like a talking drum. What would she do next? The next morning, Amina woke up with a plan. She knew the villagers might grow suspicious if she asked for only panties, so she decided to make her trade seem ordinary. With the money Asha had given her, Amina went to the market and bought colorful buckets and bowls, big and small, each one shining under the morning sun. When she returned to the village, she knocked on the first door. An old woman opened it, her eyes narrowing at Amina. "Good morning, Mama," Amina greeted, holding up a bright blue bucket. "I'm exchanging these for any old clothes, shoes, or even panties you don't need." The old woman grunted. "Old clothes, shoes, panties," she shook her head. "What kind of business is that?" "It's for a new venture," Amina said, her voice steady. "If you have anything you're not using, I'll trade you for this fine bucket." The old woman's eyes lit up at the sight of the bucket. Without hesitation, she went inside and returned with a pile of old clothes and shoes, topped with a few worn-out panties. "Thank you, Mama," Amina smiled. "Here's your bucket." At each house, it was the same. The villagers eagerly handed over their useless items for Amina's shiny bowls and buckets. By the end of the day, her sack was full, bulging with clothes, shoes, and most importantly, panties. The buzz around Amina's trade was palpable, and soon, she became the center of attention in Kosi. Everywhere she went, the villagers would greet her with eager faces, offering their old clothes, shoes, and panties in exchange for her prized bowls and buckets. Amina had become something of a legend, an enigma whose wealth seemed to come from nowhere, and yet, everyone was drawn to her business. The women would gather around her, their hands full of old, worn-out garments, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. The air was thick with chatter as they eagerly made their exchanges, excited to receive the goods Amina had to offer. "Do you think Amina will come today?" one woman asked, her voice tinged with impatience. "She should," another replied, her hands nervously clutching a faded dress. "I've saved all my old clothes just for her." Amina stood at the center of the crowd, her smile radiant and welcoming, but her eyes held a distant, calculating look, as if she were always thinking ahead, always watching for the next opportunity. She'd learned to play the game well, to turn the villagers' needs into something far more profitable than they could ever imagine. And yet, even as her success grew, something inside Amina felt hollow. The trade, the endless exchange, became a blur of faces and voices, each one blending into the next. But with every sack of panties she handed over to Asha, something darker seemed to settle into her soul. She had come so far, too far to turn back now. The payments were too good, the life she had always dreamed of was within her grasp. But deep down, she knew she was tethered to something far more dangerous than she could ever admit. The villagers, blind to the true nature of Amina's success, continued to celebrate her. They saw her not just as a successful trader, but as a symbol of prosperity, the one who had risen from the depths of poverty to become something greater. And they were all too eager to join in her success, to give up their old, unwanted items in exchange for a taste of the life she had carved out for herself. But one person in the village couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Tinu, ever observant and sharp-eyed, began to notice the oddities, the strange look in Amina's eyes when she returned from her late-night excursions, the way she would disappear into the night with heavy sacks and return hours later, her face calm but her eyes, different. Tinu had always prided herself on her ability to notice the smallest of details, and tonight, as the sun set and Amina prepared to leave for another mysterious rendezvous, her curiosity finally overpowered her caution. She knew this was the moment to find out the truth. Tinu wrapped herself in a thick shawl, her breath steady, and she slipped out of her hut, making sure to stay hidden in the shadows as she followed Amina's familiar path to the river. The night was cool and silent, the only sound the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. Tinu's heart pounded as she crept along, her eyes fixed on Amina, who moved with purpose, her sack swinging gently by her side. They reached the river's edge, where Asha waited, her presence as unnerving as ever. Tinu stayed hidden in the underbrush, holding her breath as she watched the exchange unfold. Amina handed over the sack of panties, and Asha, with her usual smile, took it without a word. The two women stood there for a moment, their eyes meeting in a silent understanding, before Asha handed Amina a thick bundle of money. "Your work is exceptional, Amina," Asha's voice was low, almost a whisper. "You're becoming more than I ever imagined." Amina nodded, her expression unreadable, but there was something in the way she held the money, the way her fingers lingered on the bundle, that unsettled Tinu. "You know what to do," Asha continued, her gaze piercing. "Don't stop now. You're closer than ever." With that, Asha turned and disappeared into the night, leaving Amina standing by the river, the sack of panties now gone, replaced by the payment she had grown so accustomed to. Tinu felt her heart race as she processed what she had just witnessed. The truth was becoming clearer with each passing moment, and the weight of it pressed heavily on her chest. Amina's success, her wealth, it all came at a cost that no one else in the village seemed to see. What was it that Asha wanted with all those panties? And why had Amina become so entangled in this mysterious trade? Tinu knew one thing for sure, the story of Amina's rise was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. And soon. Tinu's heart pounded as she watched Amina slip away into the night, her figure a shadow against the darkened village. The soft rustling of her sack was the only sound that marked her departure. Tinu's curiosity had become an obsession. Each night, she saw Amina leave, and each night, she wondered where she went. It was as if Amina's transformation wasn't just about the physical riches she had gained, but something far deeper, something hidden in the darkness of the night. The village was quiet now, the firelight flickering in a few scattered huts, and the evening chill had begun to settle in. The kind of stillness that made every sound sharper, every movement more pronounced. Tinu wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and followed, moving as silently as she could, careful not to be detected. The path to the river was familiar to both of them, but tonight, it felt different. Tinu's every step seemed to echo in her ears, and the air felt heavy with the questions that swirled in her mind. She knew she had to find out what was going on. There had to be something more to Amina's success than met the eye. No one's fortunes changed so quickly, so easily. And no one seemed to question it. As she neared the riverbank, she could see Amina ahead, walking with purpose. Her sack hung heavily at her side, and she moved with a quiet confidence, almost as though she knew she was being followed. Tinu held her breath, staying close to the trees and out of the path of the moonlight, watching as Amina reached the edge of the river. Then, she saw Asha. Asha was always there, standing in the same spot by the water, her dark eyes glinting in the dim light. The woman's presence was both magnetic and unsettling. Every time Amina met her, it was as if something unspoken passed between them, something that tied Amina's success to Asha in a way Tinu couldn't quite understand. Amina approached Asha, her movements deliberate. Tinu's heart raced as she crouched down, not daring to make a sound. She watched intently as Amina lifted the sack and handed it over to Asha, who accepted it with a knowing smile. The exchange was swift, almost ritualistic. Amina's face betrayed no emotion as she received the thick bundle of money from Asha. "Good work, Amina," Asha's voice was soft, almost too soft, as she spoke. "Keep up the pace, and you'll have everything you've ever dreamed of." Amina's lips twitched into a brief smile, but Tinu noticed how her eyes darkened, as if there was something unsettling beneath that calm exterior. "Thank you," Amina replied, her voice low, but full of something Tinu couldn't quite place. For a moment, there was silence between the two women, an unspoken understanding hanging in the air. Tinu's breath caught in her throat as she watched Amina turn and walk away, the sack now empty, the bundle of money securely tucked away in her hands. Asha remained by the river for a few moments longer, her sharp gaze sweeping the surroundings before she, too, disappeared into the night. Tinu waited, her mind racing. There was no mistaking it now, there was something sinister about Amina's success. The sack of panties, the late-night meetings, the way Amina's life had transformed so suddenly, it all pointed to a deal that was more than just a trade. It was a dangerous game, one that Tinu had only just begun to uncover. The next day, as the sun rose over Nkosi, Tinu could hardly think of anything else. Her mind was consumed with the strange ritual she had witnessed. She could no longer ignore the growing sense of unease that had settled deep within her chest. She had to know more, had to find out what Amina and Asha were really up to. And she was willing to do whatever it took to uncover the truth. Amina's trade had already spread beyond Nkosi, reaching neighboring villages with the same fervor. Her colorful buckets and gleaming bowls had become coveted treasures. Women eagerly brought their old clothes, shoes, and panties to her, desperate for a piece of the fortune she seemed to hold in her hands. They all believed it was just a simple exchange, a way to make their lives better. They didn't see what Tinu now saw, the darkness lurking behind Amina's newfound wealth. But as the days passed, Tinu's suspicions grew. Amina had become bolder, more confident, but also more distant. The villagers, unaware of the truth, continued to celebrate her success. To them, Amina had become a symbol of prosperity. But to Tinu, she was a puzzle, and the pieces weren't fitting together. Tinu decided she couldn't wait any longer. That night, she would follow Amina once again. But this time, she would get closer. She would uncover the secret Amina was hiding, no matter what it took. The village fell into quiet again, the sounds of crickets and distant chatter filling the air. Tinu wrapped herself in the same thick shawl and stepped out into the cool night, her footsteps as soft as a whisper. This time, there would be no retreat. She would uncover the truth behind Amina's trade, no matter the cost.